Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the HSC Fort Worth DPT Admissions Information Session this evening. I'm Felicity White, the Director of Admissions for the program. On the webinar with me is my colleague Pam Pleasant from the Office of Admissions. So we have prepared some information that we hope you'll all find helpful. But really our goal this evening is to make sure that we get your questions about the application process answered. So as I'm going through the presentation, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to type those in the questions section in the GoToWebinar app here. Pam will be responding to questions as I go through the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, if we still have questions, we'll keep the webinar open and we'll respond to those questions. So don't hesitate to type in your questions at any time. This evening, we'll be talking about the eligibility requirements. We'll go over the prerequisites for the program, the academic requirements. We'll go over the application requirements, so you know everything that you need to submit to us to make that successful application. And then where we'll spend most of our time talking this evening is about strategies for making sure that you have built a competitive application for the program. So again, I see a few more people have joined since we started. At any time during the presentation tonight, feel free to type in questions in the GoToWebinar app, and either myself or Pam Pleasant from the Office of Admissions will respond to those. So jumping right in, there are a few things that you have to do in order to be an eligible applicant to the DPT program. There are absolutely no exceptions to our eligibility requirements. And I'm always surprised how many people every year submit an application that's technically not eligible. And so I want to make sure I go over these quickly, just so that you are aware of the eligibility requirements and you make sure that you are submitting an eligible application. But just again, note, there are no exceptions to these requirements. We have never considered a candidate for the program who failed to meet these requirements. So you do absolutely have to meet them. The first is that you have to have a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited college or university in the United States that you earned prior to matriculating into the DPT program. So if you've already completed your degree, that's great. It didn't have to be in any particular major. The majority of applicants who apply to DPT school will have a degree in exercise science, kinesiology, or another science discipline. But we accept students from a wide variety of majors. So it doesn't have to be any particular major, but it does have to be a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited college or university. Many people who apply to the DPT program will have their degree in progress at the time they make their application, and that's fine. You can have your degree in progress. You're just going to have to indicate to us in your application which degree you intend to complete and when and where you intend to complete it. And then if we're able to make you an offer of admission into the program, it will be contingent on you completing the degree that you had outlined in your application materials. So you don't have to wait until you have the degree completed in order to make your application, but you have to have that plan in place to have the degree completed before PT school would start. We have a couple of GPA requirements. So at the time that you make your application to the program, we have a minimum of a 3.0 requirement in your most recent 60 credit hours of coursework. And then we also have a 3.0 GPA requirement in our specifically required prerequisites. So we require 30 credit hours of prerequisite classes, and I've got a list of those coming up on a future slide so you can see them. But in those 30 credit hours, your grade point average has to be at least a 3.0. And then, of course, you do also have to complete all of the prerequisite requirements. So once you meet those 4 targets, your application is eligible for admission. There is a difference between an eligible application and a competitive application. And we'll talk later on this evening about kind of the targets that you need to reach in order to make sure that you have a competitive application. But these eligibility requirements are the minimum requirements. And again, no exception to those. So really take a critical look at your application and make sure that you're meeting these targets before you submit it. We've got some academic requirements that you have to meet those prerequisites that I talked about. Just like you can have your degree in progress when you make your application to the DPT program, you could have prerequisite courses planned or in progress. We would encourage you to have as many of the prerequisites completed as possible when you submit your application, because your performance in those courses is one of the factors the admissions committee is going to base their decision on. But you can have prerequisites planned or in progress. And if you do that, if you're submitting an application before you have satisfied all of the prerequisite course requirements, you just have to make extra sure in your application that you're showing us which classes you intend to complete and when and where you intend to complete them, so that we know you have a plan in place to satisfy the prerequisite course requirements. And then, if you do make a successful application to the program with prerequisites or any other coursework still in progress, if we make you an offer of admission, it'll be contingent on you completing all of the coursework you had said you would be completing when you submitted your application. So it's really important that in your PTCAS application, you show that you have the classes planned or in progress, so we know you have that plan to complete them. Just like the eligibility requirements, the prerequisite requirements, there's no exceptions to the requirements. There are no waivers for prerequisites. Substitutions aren't permitted. You do have to complete all of them. Each individual class that we require as a prerequisite has to be completed with a grade of C or higher. Although again, remember from the previous slide that your cumulative prerequisite GPA has to be a minimum of a 3.0. And then for us, prerequisite course credits don't expire. So if you took a prerequisite course 5 or 7 or 10 years ago, that's fine. Some programs place restrictions on how long ago they want the prerequisites completed. For us, it's not an issue. You do need the content knowledge from the prerequisite classes. It's foundational knowledge that you will need to be successful in the curriculum. The coursework for the DPT program starts very quickly. It's science intensive, graduate curriculum. It's going to be very fast paced. And so you'll need the foundational knowledge from the prerequisites in order to be successful. If you took one of these prerequisite classes 15 or 20 years ago and you haven't maintained that content knowledge, it may be in your best interest to take that refresher so that you have that knowledge. But as far as being eligible, it doesn't matter how long ago the course was taken. So the courses that we're going to look for, when we're talking about the required hours, we're always talking about semester credit hours. If you've attended an institution that used a quarter-hour system, you'll just need to convert those hours to semester credit hours to make sure that you've had the minimum amount of content. So we're going to look for anatomy and physiology with labs at 8 hours, biology coursework at 3 hours, chemistry with lab at 8 hours, physics with labs at 8 hours, and then at least 3 hours of psychology coursework. The science classes do have to be intended for science majors. Usually you will be aware of that. It'll be in the course description in your university's course catalog. If you ever have a question though about whether or not a prerequisite class or whether a class that you're considering taking or the course that you have completed will fulfill one of our prerequisite requirements, what I would encourage you to do is visit the DPT admissions page on the unthsc.edu website. In the section of that admissions page where it lists the prerequisite requirements, there's a link to a web form that you can fill out. It's going to ask you some of the details about the class in question. And then when you submit those details to our office, one of our staff members can take a look at it and give you a confirmation about whether or not that course will satisfy our prerequisite requirement. We're usually able to provide those answers within just 1 or 2 business days. So again, if you have a question, that's the best mechanism just to make sure that you really do have the prerequisite requirements satisfied. And then one note on the anatomy and physiology coursework, it can be completed usually one of 2 ways. Different undergraduate institutions have different pathways through anatomy and physiology. So it seems like about half of the undergraduate institutions that we encounter offer a sequence of AMP1 and AMP2 with labs. We would consider that equivalent to 4 hours of anatomy and 4 hours of physiology. The other half of undergraduate institutions offer it as a standalone anatomy class with lab and a standalone physiology class with lab. Either route through AMP is fine as long as it's intended for science majors. And again, if you're unsure if it's intended for science majors, just use that web form on our admissions website and get a definitive answer from one of the counselors in our office. So those are the prerequisites that have to be completed. Those courses are non-negotiable. We do also have a list of strongly recommended courses. Now, these ones are not required in order to be eligible for admission into the program, but the faculty have identified these courses as having valuable content, content knowledge that's not necessary to get through the program, but that is beneficial and will help you, especially at the start of the program. And so if you can fit these courses into your schedule, we would strongly recommend that you do so. So if in your degree plan you can fit in biomechanics, exercise physiology, statistics, and in particular medical terminology, they will just help you be more successful more quickly in the program as a DPT student. So we would encourage you to take them. And then of course, if you're able to do well in these courses, it enhances your application. So not required here, but strongly recommended. So you have made it to the point now where you know that your application is eligible for admission and you're ready to submit an application. We participate in the PTCAS, that's that Common Application Service for Physical Therapy programs. So you'll submit a PTCAS. Like many professional school programs, we look at applications on a rolling basis. And so there's one application cycle every year. The application always opens in early July, and then programs have different deadlines throughout the fall. Our deadline will be November the 1st. So the application will be open from July the 1st, approximately, to November the 1st. Even though the application doesn't close until November the 1st, early in the application cycle, we're going to start to evaluate applications. We're going to start making invitations for candidates to join us for an interview. And then following our interviews, we're going to start making invitations to join the program. So if you waited all the way until November 1st to submit your application to us, you will have missed out on opportunities for your application to be considered for an interview, and there will be fewer seats left in the class than if you had applied early in the cycle. So it's in your best interest to think about your timeline, think about when you're going to have built your strongest application, and make sure that that is going to be early in the application cycle so that you can submit an application when all of our available interview spots are open and we haven't yet filled any of the seats in the class. So for us, that means by early August, we're going to start to make invitations to interview. So you want to have your application completed in that first month that PTCAS is open if you want to be considered for all of the available interviews. For us, we don't review an application until it's met a few criteria. So you have submitted your PTCAS application. That means it's complete. We don't look at the applications when they're complete. We look at applications when they become verified. And what that means is you've done your part as an applicant. You have submitted all of the questions on the application. But verified means that all of your supporting materials have arrived. So all of your transcripts and letters of recommendation have arrived. And then PTCAS staff members have gone through what you put in the application to verify that it's accurate. At that point, it's released to us as a program, and that's when we'll start to take a look at it. That verification process will take a few weeks from the time that all of your materials arrive. So think about that as your time in your application. You're going to submit it, but you want to make sure that you've got a couple of week window after everything is submitted before we're going to start to take a look at it. So think about that in your timeline. We're going to review applications in the order they become complete for us. Complete for us means we've got that verified PT-CAS, and we also have your $40 application processing fee that you pay directly to the program. You'll receive a link to pay that application processing fee as soon as we have received your verified PT-CAS. So just be aware that once those criteria are met, that's when your application will go into our queue for the admissions committee to start reviewing it. So you know the eligibility requirements, you know how to submit a successful application file. What we'll talk about for the rest of the evening are what are the criteria that the admissions committee look at to select candidates for interview and ultimately to select candidates to join the program. So what can you do to make sure that you have built a competitive application for this program? We try and be really transparent about the things that we consider in our selection process. And so this is an exhaustive list that we've got projected here. If it's not on this list, it's not part of our selection process. However, we have so many candidates make application to this program that it is a very competitive process. And so as we're talking about the areas that the admissions committee looks at, we're talking about more than meeting the minimum requirements. We're even talking about more than just convincing the faculty that you could be a strong student or a great clinician. We're talking about convincing the faculty that you are in the top 5 to 10% of candidates who make application to this program in consideration of all the different areas that we look at. And so it's important that you think about building a strong file in all these different areas. And so we'll go through these selection criteria one by one, and I'll try to give you a snapshot of what a typically admitted student looks like, and we'll go over some strategies that you can use to make sure that you're building a strong file in these different areas. So as an applicant to the program, the first thing that you have to convince the admissions committee of is that you have the potential to be successful academically in this program. And what will give them confidence that you can be successful academically is a consistent record of academic success leading up to the DPT program. So you can see in our most recent application cycle, we looked heavily at the candidate's last 60 GPA, and that was an average of about a 3.8 for our admitted student. The range of GPAs for admitted students in regard to last 60 GPA was about a 3.6 to a 4.0. We also look heavily at prerequisite GPA, and so that again was almost a 3.8 average GPA. The range for that about a 3.4 up to a 4.0. We look less heavily at overall GPA. We give most consideration to the performance in the last 60 hours in the prerequisite courses. But if you're looking at a range for overall GPA, admitted students were somewhere between a 3.3 and a 4.0. But again, that average was higher. And so usually when we see a candidate who joins the program with a lower than average overall GPA, we see that there's an upward trend in their academic performance. So they have a stronger prerequisite GPA, they have a stronger most recent 60 hours GPA. It's pretty rare that we admit someone into the program who has grades below a B in prerequisite courses. Remember, like I said, those prerequisite courses have foundational knowledge that you need in order to be successful in the curriculum. And so the faculty is looking to see that students have demonstrated mastery of that content. So grades of A and B in prerequisite courses, and usually more A's than B's. And then we want to see consistent academic success. In the DPT program, again, the curriculum moves quickly, and the content from one class will show up again in classes that follow it. So courses build on one another. Students have to successfully complete every single course in order to continue to move through the curriculum. There's not an option to fail a class or withdraw from a class. And so students have to be consistently successful. When they can show us that consistency in their undergraduate record, that's something that will give the admissions committee confidence. And so things that would be red flags in your undergraduate record would be a pattern of failing courses or a pattern of withdrawing from courses. Just because you can't do those things in this graduate program And so if you're critically looking at your application, at your transcript, and you do have a pattern of withdrawing from classes, what you'll need to do is address that somewhere in the application. There'll likely be a short answer question that it would be appropriate to reflect on that in, and explain what happened, how you overcame it, and why it won't be an issue going forward. And then that explanation needs to be coupled with recent consistent academic success in order for it to be convincing. So that's kind of a snapshot there academically of students who are admitted into the program. We're going to have many more candidates who have academic potential than we have space in our class for. So right now our class seats 46 students each year. Many more than 46 candidates who apply to our program have academic potential. So once we have been convinced of someone's academic potential, then everything else on that list that I had highlighted is what is going to matter as we're determining who to invite to interview with the program. Knowledge of the profession is one of those really important selection factors to our admissions committee. The faculty want to be convinced that students joining our program are making a well-informed decision to pursue this particular profession. If you have an application that's strong enough to be admitted to DPT school, there are many other graduate programs that you could also be admitted to. You go to medical school, PA school, pharmacy school. There are things outside of medicine that you could do. And so the faculty really wants to be convinced that this particular profession is well suited to you and your career goals and your strengths, and that you know that about yourself because you have had exposure to the profession. So most commonly, students that are joining our program have done some shadowing with PTs in a variety of different settings, working in different specialties, working with different patient populations, so that it's obvious that the student has really explored the profession broadly and they are making that well-informed decision. Kind of hand in hand with knowledge of the profession is some experience working with patients, working in healthcare settings. And so the average admitted student has worked for about 2 years in a part-time capacity leading up to PT school. And it's most favorable if they've done that in a setting where PTs practice. So again, they're having this exposure to the PT profession. It is convincing to the faculty that these students are making a well-informed decision to pursue the physical therapy profession, and that the students already have interpersonal skills and the emotional intelligence to work with patients. That's something that's foundational for us, something that the faculty can build on. So most commonly, you will see students entering our program who have worked part-time as PT technicians or rehabilitation aides. Sometimes you see students join the program who have had more extensive training and credentialing in healthcare, so they might work as a PTA or an athletic trainer, something of that nature. But most commonly, they're working as PT techs or rehab aides leading up to PT school. And so if you don't already have that experience or exposure, I would encourage you to think about how you would accomplish that in the coming months or years as you're preparing your application for the program. Letters of recommendation weigh heavily in our selection process. We want to see students join our program where we have confidence in their abilities. One way that we can gain that confidence is through unbiased third parties giving us some insight into the candidate's character, their professionalism and work ethic. I will tell you, in a decade of reading all of the letters of recommendation to this DPT program, I can still count on my fingers the number of times I've read a negative letter of recommendation. Most people have the social skills to know if someone likes them. And as a candidate, you ask people who like you to write letters of recommendation. So overwhelmingly, letters of recommendation are positive. And because every candidate has positive letters of recommendation, they don't really stand out. So those letters that just say, so-and-so was in my class and they were a great student, or so-and-so was in my clinic and all of our patients really liked him. That's a positive letter of recommendation, but it doesn't do anything really to support your application because all of the other candidates have that same letter. The letters that really stand out are ones where you have done some work as a candidate. So you have done some work to develop a relationship with the letter writer so that they have a lot of examples to reflect on, or that you have given the letter writer some instruction about the types of things that it would be appropriate for them to reflect on. These people writing these letters are professional people, but they're not necessarily professional recommendation writers. And so it would be appropriate for you to give some instruction about the types of things that we're looking for. And so what we're looking for are specific examples about your potential. So I guess I'll take one step back. First, I always think it should go without saying, but you'd be surprised how many letters we get that don't follow these guidelines. So we are asking for professional letters of recommendation, not personal letters. So make sure that you're not asking for letters from family members, family friends, people who know you personally. You know, I know your mother loves you. She will not write an unbiased letter of recommendation. So it would call into question your professional judgment if you asked a family member to write one of these letters. We're looking for professional letters of recommendation. So physical therapists who've had a chance to observe you in a clinical setting, professors who you have studied with, supervisors at work, other people who you have encountered in a professional capacity. And we're looking for those people to have specific examples of your potential about why you will be a successful student in a graduate level science curriculum, why you will be successful as a clinician. So it would be appropriate for them to reflect on your professionalism, your work ethic, your motivation, your ability to be a team player, your interpersonal skills, your emotional intelligence. All of those things are qualities that we would want insights into. All of those are qualities that we would want to see in students that we admit to this program. So more than just saying this person was, you know, volunteered in our clinic and they were great, I need to know why were you great? What qualities that you have that are already well developed that we can build on to make sure that you will be successful in this program and ultimately successful as a healthcare professional. So you've got to do the work to build those relationships so that people do have examples they can reflect on, and then give them some instruction about the types of things that it would be appropriate for them to write about. Volunteerism and community engagement is another important component. We really want to invite students to join this program who have a heart for service, who are going to go on to be role models in the community, who are going to contribute to the success of their classmates, who are going to contribute to the success of the Health Science Center. The HSC Fort Worth is a values-based institution. First among our shared values is service to others. And so when we see students coming into the program that have already demonstrated that heart for service, it really stands out in a positive way. Our admitted students have typically dedicated 300+ hours to community projects. And when you're dedicating that number of hours, you are likely making an impact. On most applications, what we see is, you know, I did this for an hour, and then I did this other thing for an hour, and I did this other thing for an hour. And now I have some things to put in my application under the section for volunteerism. But again, all candidates have that, so it doesn't stand out. What stands out is I was really passionate about a particular issue. I took long-term sustained action, and then this was the positive outcome. This was the difference I made in my community. This was the difference I made in someone's life. When you can tell that story, it's much more powerful. It's much more rare, and so it really stands out in your application. So I would encourage you to consider, what are you passionate about? What need do you see in your community, and how can you fulfill that? That's what the faculty will want to see, and that's what will convince them that you will really be an active and engaged student in the program, that you will contribute to the success of your classmates, and that you will be an advocate for your patients in the future. Your volunteerism doesn't have to be healthcare related, but you'll have those transferable skills regardless of where you're making your difference in your community. Communication skills are another important factor. In order to be a successful clinician, in order to be a successful graduate student, you have to be a strong communicator. We're first going to evaluate that through your written application materials. So really have a care with how you present yourself in your application. Make sure your tone is professional. Make sure that your application isn't full of typos, particularly in the essays. Make sure that you're using appropriate grammar and essay construction. Have people proofread it for you, but really know that your written materials are your option to convince the admissions committee that you have well-developed written communication skills and that you can present yourself in a professional and polished way. We're also really going to be valuing an evaluation of your interpersonal skills, and that is one of the reasons that we conduct interviews for the program. Professional school interviews can be pretty nerve-wracking, and they're hard to prepare for. Our interview is scenario-based, and so it is hard to prepare for. The thing that you can do to make sure that you're as prepared as possible for a professional school interview is to feel confident and poised, to be able to control your nerves. And the best way that I can give you advice to develop that poise under pressure is to do as much mock interviewing as you can, to be kind of kept on your toes, to learn how to think critically and quickly and be able to respond to scenarios, to answer questions. Mock interviewing is going to be the best way to kind of build that muscle. So I'd encourage you, do mock interviewing with professors that you're studying with, clinicians that you're working with. I'm sure even for those of you who are already graduated from your undergraduate institution has someone whose job it is to help you prepare for interviews. So take advantage of those people's services. Even as alumni, you probably have access to them, but do all you can to practice just staying calm and remaining poised under pressure. And that is going to be what will serve you best on your professional school interview, because they're all going to be very different and they're all going to be difficult to prepare for other than that. So that really is it. There are a lot of things that are not on this list. Things like what is your state of residency or what is your age? Those are not qualities that we evaluate in our selection process. It is academics, knowledge of the profession, experience working in healthcare, your letters of recommendation, your history of volunteerism, and your interpersonal and communication skills. It takes a lot of effort as an applicant to be outstanding in all these different areas. And because of how competitive this process is, you really do have to be outstanding in all of the areas that we consider. So hopefully tonight's presentation gave you some ideas for strategies that you can use to further develop your application. I know that some of you have been asking questions and Pam has been responding to those. We'll go ahead and keep the webinar open for a while longer, and we'll see if more questions come in. I can respond to those. We are always happy, though, to answer your questions. And so if you have questions that come up after tonight, or if you want some advice on maybe some different scenarios that you're considering, always feel free to reach out to us. Right now, our staff is not on campus. We're working remotely. And so the best way to get in touch with us is email, and that's ptadmissions@unthsc.edu. So I'm going to jump into the question section here and see if there's anything left that Pam hasn't already responded to. Looks like we've got a few. How will the program look at applicants who are unable to complete as much observation hours, community service hours, et cetera, due to the COVID-19 situation? And so we are we are certainly aware of that. We are aware that the pandemic is going to adjust people's plans and intentions. What I would encourage you to do, there's going to be a question on the PT-CAS where you're able to explain the impact that COVID-19 has had on your preparation. So I would encourage, it's an optional question, but I would encourage you to answer it and answer it thoroughly. Tell us what your intentions were. And so if there is anything that you're not able to get done, make sure that you address it there, but know that it is going to be impacting all candidates. So we will keep that in mind, but we are still going to be looking at people's depth and length of preparation. It is also important, you apply when you have built your strongest application. And so you'll have to think about whether or not what's going on in the world right now impacts your timeline for applying. But we will be keeping that in consideration this cycle for certain. What does the program emphasize the most? Is it a certain specialty, manual therapy, etc.? So, I mean, the program is a generalist program. They're going to prepare you to pass your licensure exams and to work in any area of physical therapy. There are many faculty who have clinical specialties and clinical designations. So if there's a particular area of interest to you, you're able to find a faculty mentor who shares that clinical interest, but the program will prepare you to be a generalist. Can you explain scenario-based interviewing with an example? So what will happen at our interview, you can look it up. It's called, if you search MMI, multiple mini interview. So what we will have is likely 7 or 8 stations where you're given a prompt, you're given a scenario, you're able to take a few minutes and compose your thoughts about that prompt, and then you enter the room where the evaluator is and you respond to the prompt. And it'll be a variety of different prompts. But if you do a search for MMI or multiple mini interview, that'll give you some good information about what that type of interviewing looks like, what the structure of it looks like. What is the licensure rate after graduation? 100%. All of our students who have graduated and taken the licensure exam have ultimately passed. Okay. Oh, there's one more. Are there scholarship opportunities for students? Yeah, there are a handful of scholarship opportunities at the HSC. So students who are admitted into the program are able to apply for those. I would say probably only about 10% of the students who join the program have an HSC Fort Worth scholarship. There are some outside scholarships that students can also apply for. And then for PT students, it's a little more typical for them to get assistance on the back end than the front end. So there are a handful of scholarships or grants that are available, but what is much more common is for students to get loan repayment assistance that they negotiate as part of their employment contract. What does clinical placement look like? Are students able to give suggestions on where they would like to do a rotation? Yes, so the program provides the clinical rotation. Students don't have to find their own clinical rotation. The majority of our clinical sites are within the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but we do have clinical sites all throughout the state of Texas, and we have some national and even a handful of international rotation sites, although the international rotation sites are being impacted right now by travel restrictions, of course. And so students will get a list of all of the available rotation sites, and then they're able to put their preferences in. We use kind of a lottery system. And so for the first rotation, if you're in the top half of students that got to pick first for rotation sites, on the second rotation, you'll be in the bottom half of students selecting. So we try to maintain fairness in that, but you don't have to secure your own rotation sites. Those are all provided by the program. Are there any additional requirements for international students? There are not. International students have to meet all of the same criteria as US residents, so you still have to have that US bachelor's degree, but there are no separate requirements. Will part of the program include business operations classes that help with navigating the running of your own practice? Yeah, yep, there are some business foundation courses that are part of the curriculum. You can look at all of the courses in the curriculum on our admissions website, and it'll give you a brief synopsis of each class. But yes, absolutely, there are business components woven into a few different classes. Are there any relationships with residency programs for individuals looking to continue in a specialty? So we don't have any residency programs that are facilitated by the program. There are many faculty members who have relationships with residency programs, and we have a handful of students that opt to join those each year. If you have a follow-up question on that, go ahead and email it to us. If there's a specific residency that you might be interested in, I can take that question to the faculty. But we don't have any residency programs that are on the HSC campus. How will we get information on when the Health Science Center will be making a decision about in-person tours? So we don't have any intention to do that before at least the middle of June, but when we have on-campus events again, we'll publish that on our website. So just like you registered for tonight's event, there will be hopefully sometime in the late summer or early fall, we'll be able to do an open house again. But it really, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know when that will be allowed, but we will publish it on our website just like we did for tonight's event. How many people do you typically waitlist? That can vary. So we usually conduct somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 175 interviews for the program. In order to fill our class of 46 students, it usually takes us somewhere between 65 and 75 offers. So we like to have a good buffer on the wait list. So we'll typically waitlist maybe 50 candidates. Okay, it looks like I've made it through the list of questions. I'll hang out just for another minute or two and see if any more come in. But again, we're always happy to field your questions if you want to email us at ptadmissions@unthsc.edu. Okay, we'll go ahead and close it out for the night. You guys had great questions. We'll look forward to seeing your applications come through our office in the future. Have a great evening.